إيه إيه لا 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 لا
I think suffering from overexposure of photographs.
بسم الله الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. First of all, we would like to welcome you all and thank you for making the effort to come to attend this talk. And before we start, we would like to take the opportunity to dearly thank the King Faisal Center for hosting such a talk and for inviting us over actually from University of Wales all the way to visit the center as well as to meet you all. And to be honest, I'd like, if you may allow me to particularly thank Dr. or Professor, in fact, Yahya bin Junaid for giving us the opportunity. And I would like to make it as short as possible, just a brief introduction about the person who's going to give the talk now. Professor Martin O'Kane, he is a professor in biblical studies at the University of Wales, Lampeter. And beside that, he is actually our director of postgrad studies. University of Wales, just to in a brief, in Lampeter, it's considered as the third oldest university in United Kingdom, and the School of Theology, Religious and Islamic Studies that we come from is considered one of the strongest in the United Kingdom. Professor Martin O'Kane, he's so much committed himself to include Islamic studies within his teaching. Whenever he teaches the biblical studies at the university, at undergrad or postgrad level, he always felt there is a need to include the Islamic perspective within his teaching, because he can always see the link between these two faiths. Religious art in general, it's the Professor Martin O'Kane particular interest. He has developed such an interest because he actually started learning or studying the Bible from a historical perspective. And when we talk about the Bible from a historical perspective, we talk about the archaeology and as well as the art as within the, you'll be told by Professor Martin more about this. In general, Christianity has always believed in with the Trinity, and one of the Trinity is Jesus, and Jesus is actually being made in a human figure, and actually after that, always the Bible being interpreted in a art and humanly sort of design or figurely depiction of the Jesus himself. Professor Martin O'Kane has a very long actually association at a personal and professional level with Palestine in general. And he's been heavily involved with not only teaching, as well as produce so many articles and books on his field of interest. And one of the most recent publication is the Biblical Art from Wales. And we gave the center a copy of that as a present. Now, I would like to Professor Martin to take the lead.
May I stand? Is it okay to stand? Can you hear me? Because I like to use the screen. Yeah. Okay. Good evening, and I'd like to repeat my colleagues' thank you to Professor Yahya, who's been enormously kind since we came. and I've been having such a wonderful time in Saudi Arabia, and it's been so productive and so fruitful. So shukran jazilan, and I feel so welcomed here. Before I begin, I wanted to ask, because I don't want to talk to the Mumalkatir, so I wanted to ask if it would be worthwhile to give a 3-minute synopsis in Arabic. To give a 3-minute synopsis in Arabic, would that be helpful at the beginning, or is everybody fluent in English? Is everybody's fine in English? Oh, okay, okay. Okay. I've so many things here. I think. Yeah. Okay. Just before I begin my talk proper, I'd like to make 6 very important points. And if you lose your way in my talk, you can remember these 6 points. In the Christian tradition, art and visual images are not something extra, not something additional. Art lies at the very heart of Christianity. This is most important. Why is this? It's because unlike Islam and Judaism, where God cannot be seen, Christians believe that God appeared physically in Jesus, and therefore God can now be seen, can be visualized, can be imagined. Number 3, unlike the Quran, the Bible has always been interpreted visually. It's not that biblical stories are actually painted, but it's actually an interpretation. Many generations of illiterate Christians only know their Bible through painting. They don't know it by reading it because they couldn't read. Visual images of the Bible and all its characters, for example, Musa, David, Solomon, Yunus, lie at the very heart of European culture. If you visit any major gallery in Europe, from London to Venice to Rome, it is full of biblical paintings. And many of these paintings include Islam and Muslims. And therefore, when people look at these paintings, they're also getting a message about Islam and about Muslims. And therefore, the Bible and its paintings are extremely influential in European culture. I cannot overemphasize this. And not only did artists through the ages want to paint biblical figures, but they were also very keen to paint the lands of the Bible, especially Palestine. That's the perspective of my talk this evening. I could talk for a week on European art, but this evening, to let you go home at a reasonable time, I decided to speak on only one aspect of Christian art, which we call Orientalist art of the 19th century, mainly from England and from France. And I picked this because that particular genre of art sometimes depicts Islam and Muslims in a very negative light. And I picked this also because early Zionists in Europe actually used this painting for their propaganda in Europe, and therefore it was a very important propaganda tool for the Zionists because of the negative representation of Islam. That is the perspective in which I want to talk this evening. Now, I've become very interested in how Muslims and Islam have found their way into biblical art and the image of Islam that's represented there. When artists wanted to depict the characters of the Bible, the people of the Bible, when they wanted to paint important scenes in Palestine associated with the Bible, when they wanted to paint what life was like at the time, in the time of the Bible, what role, if any, was to be given to Muslims who now were inhabiting the land in the 19th century, who of course were Muslim. This is my topic: how and why Islam should be featured in European biblical art and what role can be given to it. And this is my topic this evening. Just to make the point again, of how biblical art is so important in Europe. Every child in the Western world will, from the time of 3, will know of images like this. This is the story of the birth of Jesus, and in that story, of course, you've got the 3 kings coming from the east. Every child acts like that in a little play every Christmas. And so every child is used with looking at Eastern images, Middle Eastern images, from the time they're 3. Many, many images like this. And so the perception of association between the Bible and Islam begins very, very early. In galleries all over Europe, like this painting of Rembrandt, you have the biblical character Belshazzar. And here you can see that he's clearly represented as a Muslim with just in his ear he's got the crescent moon, the Ottoman turban, and here Belshazzar, who's a very evil character in the Bible, is represented as Muslim. And very often you'll find in European art the evil characters sometimes depicted as Muslim or with a symbol of Islam in their clothing. And very often, too, in the 19th century, you've got this imagined biblical landscape taken from the Middle East. Now, the lands that were very important for the artists, European artists, were, of course, the biblical journey of Ibrahim, as described in the Christian Bible, beginning from Ur in modern Iraq, Mesopotamia, right throughout Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and down into Egypt. So these are the lands that the Christians were very, very interested in because they followed the route of Ibrahim. These are the lands that they wanted to visit, and these are the inhabitants of these lands that they wanted to paint. And when they came to these lands, they wanted to see, well, somehow, are the present inhabitants very similar to the characters of old? How can we visualize these? And of course, today, you know these countries better than I do, and you've got this whole interest in European travelers from the same journey: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, down into Egypt. So this was the lands that they actually wanted to depict. Now, my starting point is really Edward Said's Orientalism. Now, Edward Said's Orientalism, scholars have actually worked on this very, very much. But they've worked on it from a political perspective, they've worked on it from a literary perspective, but very, very few people have actually worked on it from a visual perspective. And what I want to do is to start off with Edward Said's perspective of Orientalism and apply it to European painting. In Said's book, Orientalism, he described Orientalism as a way of describing the presumed or the argued inferiority of the Islamic Middle East by the West. Said, as you know, argued that Orientalism served political ends for the West. It misrepresented Arab and Islamic cultures by viewing them through a European lens, and that Orientalism was as much about defining what Europe was as about the Middle East itself. However, Said was not interested in the visual image, and to my mind, only 3 people have actually extended Said's perspective to any significant degree to the visual artistic world. And one of these, the first of these, is Linda Naughlin's book, The Imaginary Orient. The second is Frederick Bohrer, who deals especially with the question of Iraq, how Iraq is presented in European painting. The third is Kenneth Bendiner from an unpublished PhD thesis on how the Middle East is portrayed in British painting with particular reference to Jerusalem. And the final one is a Syrian sociologist who actually argues that the French and English imperialism in the 19th century was equivalent to the American and British imperialism of the 20th century. So she's a very, very interesting writer there. If you look at these book titles, you can see that a common word is imaginary, imagining, the portrayal, and regarding. In other words, all these words in English suggest that they were imagining, creating what they wanted the Middle East to be, rather than what it actually was in reality. This is the title of these books, and of course they all follow Edward Said's argument. Now, I want to begin a little bit earlier than this, from the time of the Renaissance. And I'm sure you're familiar with this map, the Ottoman Empire, under Suleiman the Magnificent in 1580. And what you may not put two and two together is that at this time, when you had this huge influence of the Ottoman Empire in Italy, you had this fantastic Italian Renaissance. All the great artists of Caravaggio, Florence, Venice, they were flourishing. And these Italian Renaissance artists took a lot of their themes from the Ottoman Empire, and there was an engagement with that. There was a particular link between Venice, which you know is here, Venice, and Scanderia here in the Christian world, because in Scanderia you had a Christian tradition associated with the writer of the Gospel, St. Mark. According to Christian tradition, St. Mark, who wrote the Gospel, was actually buried here. But Christian tradition has it that in the 8th century, the people came from Venice, stole the bones of St. Mark, and took them into Venice. And that the big cathedral that you have in Venice is actually built on the bones of St. Mark. So there was a great link between Venice in the Italian Renaissance and Scanderia in the Ottoman Empire. You also had many other links. For example, the great Italian Renaissance artist Bellini was in fact the Venetian ambassador in Istanbul. And especially with these artists in Italy, they had a lot of contact with the Ottoman Empire, and so they were seeing figures there and used them in their painting. Now, after the defining Ottoman success, crowned by the conquest of Constantinople or Istanbul in 1453, it became possible to picture biblical people in an exotic setting modeled on the contemporary Muslim and especially Ottoman East. The Bible lands came to be exoticized in the Western imagination as part of the Orient. And Renaissance artists from Italy viewed, when they saw all the dress codes of the Ottomans, especially the Ottoman turban, they used this Ottoman turban to depict people long time ago in the Bible. And so where you have a lot of paintings with the Ottoman turban, this was the influence from that period. Now, if you know Florence, of course, which was at the heart of the Italian Renaissance, and these the doors of the baptistry are regarded as the very essence of the height of the artistic powers in the Renaissance. And here you have the prophets of the Bible depicted as with the turban in Ottoman style. So from the Renaissance, artists began more and more to depict the Bible from what they see in the Ottoman Empire. You also have Verrocchio, who was a great Italian Renaissance artist. When in the Italian Renaissance, they loved to paint and sculpt the biblical character of David. And here, on the David's armor on the back, even though they didn't know Arabic, they tried to mock the style of Arabic writing to give King David a kind of exotic Oriental, non-Western kind of feel about this sculpture. One of the landmark paintings, which is now in the Louvre in Paris, was the ambassadors of Venice arriving in Damascus in 1511. And this was regarded as a watershed painting, which is copied by many others. It depicts ambassadors from Venice being received in Damascus in the late 15th century by a group of Mamluk dignitaries. It represents a kind of unique diplomatic presence enjoyed by the Venetians in the Middle East. And the reason why this is important is it was used by many artists to depict biblical scenes that were put into the Bible itself. And from this period, when Europeans read the Bible, the editions of the Bible included many paintings that were following that particular style. And to give you an example of these, you have Albert Dürer. Albert Dürer was one of the first European artists to include a lot of these Orientalist images in the Bible. And here you have the story of Lot, but you can see here that you have the dress of the Ottoman period, and you can see how these biblical figures becoming more and more like Ottoman figures. I said that there was a great link between Venice and Scanderia in Egypt. And here you have St. Mark preaching as he does in the Bible. But in this case, he's actually preaching to a group of clothed women and men in headgear. In other words,